generation of young people may never be able to own their own homes.
The slump of 20.4% in economic growth is...
Of people have taken to the streets of towns and cities across England.
Today, England feels restless, a nation questioning itself, divided, disillusioned, searching for something solid in the noise. But trust me, this island has seen worse. Let's go thousands of years back where it all started. Before there was an England, there were whispers in the forests, long before crowns and parliaments, before Shakespeare's quill or Churchill's voice. This land was wild, untamed. Here, ancient tribes hunted in silence. Giants of stone rose in sacred circles. Then came the empires. The Romans brought roads, walls, and war. The Saxons carved out kingdoms. The Vikings brought fire. And from blood, betrayal, and battle, a nation began to rise. This is not just the story of kings. It's the story of survival, of how a fractured island became a kingdom that would one day rule the waves. Journey with us to the dawn of England, from the first footprints to the footsteps of William the Conqueror. This is England's history. Episode 1: Foundations. Long before history was written, Britain was a world of shadow and silence. Around 8000 BC, as the glaciers retreated and seas rose, the island was reborn, its forests thick, its skies vast, and its future unwritten. The first humans here were hunters, moving through the wild with stone tools and firelight, tracking deer through ancient woods and gathering beneath the stars. In time, they settled. Neolithic farmers cleared land, raised livestock, and carved sacred patterns into chalk hillsides. They built homes, communities, and monuments. Across wind-swept plains, great stones were lifted by hand and aligned to the heavens. Stonehenge, Avebury. These were not just places, but prayers made in stone, echoing with mystery and meaning. Bronze brought new tools and new power. Tribes formed, competed, and traded. With the Iron Age came hill forts, towering defenses that dotted the landscape like watchful eyes. Warrior kings ruled in circles of loyalty, bound by honor and blood. Though they left no written record, they left a world rich in silence. Earthworks, barrows, and bones beneath the soil. These early Britons laid no claim to England, but they shaped its soul. In every stone circle and burial mound, in every path worn into the land, they whispered a beginning. The Roman Conquest and Rule, 43 to 410 AD. In the year 43 AD, the thunder of iron-shod feet echoed across the southern shores of Britain. Emperor Claudius, seeking prestige and a legacy, had sent his legions to conquer the wild island once scouted and then abandoned by Julius Caesar nearly a century earlier. What had once seemed a distant and hostile land now became the edge of empire. The invasion was swift and brutal. Roman organization and discipline overwhelmed the disjointed tribal resistance. Fortress by fortress, hill fort by hill fort, the legions advanced north and west, establishing control. With them came roads, forts, and cities laid out with precision. Symbols of Roman order imposed on a land long ruled by chaos, but not all submitted. In the east, a storm gathered. Boudicca, queen of the Iceni, rose in rebellion after her people were humiliated and her daughters abused. Fueled by rage and desperation, she led tens of thousands in revolt. Roman towns burned. Colchester was razed. Londinium, the Roman capital, was evacuated and left to the flames. For a moment, Rome teetered. Then, with grim efficiency, it struck back. The rebellion was crushed. Boudicca's army was slaughtered. The queen herself, according to legend, took poison rather than be paraded in chains. Her resistance became myth, a warning, and a legend that even empires fear the fury of the conquered. Over the decades, Roman rule tightened. They built cities from the ground up. Londinium, with its bridge and forum, Bath, famed for its healing waters and grand temples. Villas spread across the countryside, signs of wealth and Romanization. Latin inscriptions marked public buildings. Amphitheaters echoed with cheers, and sometimes screams. To the north, however, the wild remained unconquered. The tribes of Caledonia, modern-day Scotland, resisted with ferocity. In response, the Romans built a line of stone and steel. Hadrian's Wall. Stretching over 70 miles across the width of Britain, it marked the edge of Roman ambition, and perhaps the limits of its control. Behind the wall, Britain became a Roman province in every sense. Taxes were collected. Governors ruled in the emperor's name. Roman religion blended uneasily with native beliefs, and the gods of Olympus stood beside ancient Celtic spirits. Mithras, Mars, and Mercury were worshipped in temples carved into hillsides. Yet not all change was forced. Some Britons embraced the Roman way. They dressed in togas, spoke Latin, and sent their sons to serve in Roman legions. Trade flourished. Goods from across the empire found their way to British shores. Glass from Gaul, wine from Hispania, oil from Africa. In return, Britain offered tin, grain, wool, and soldiers. Over time, a hybrid identity emerged. Not fully Roman, not fully native, but something in between. Villas dotted the countryside, mosaics gleamed underfoot, and bathhouses steamed in the cold northern air. Britain had become, for a time, a true part of Rome's vast mosaic. But the empire was crumbling. By the early 4th century, cracks were visible everywhere. Plague, economic collapse, and barbarian pressure weakened the once unstoppable legions. In 367, the so-called barbarian conspiracy struck. Coordinated attacks from Picts, Saxons, and others shook Roman Britain to its core. Garrisons fell, towns were abandoned, chaos returned. Rome responded, but not for long. As the empire was pulled apart by civil war and foreign invasions, Britain became a distant afterthought. In 410 AD, Emperor Honorius famously told the Britons to look to their own defenses. The legions departed. The forts were emptied. The roads fell silent. And just like that, after nearly 4 centuries, Rome was gone. But its shadow lingered. The roads still cut across the land like scars. Latin words remained in the language. Roman law and architecture shaped what came next. The memory of Roman Britain, of its cities, its stones, its strange gods, would haunt the island for generations. In its wake, power fractured. A new era was about to begin. One ruled not by emperors but by warlords. The Romano-British would soon face waves of invaders from across the sea. Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. A 1,000-year-old empire had fallen, and 1,000 years of struggle would follow before a new England emerged from its ruins. Anglo-Saxon England and the heptarchy circa 410 to 800 AD. When the Roman legions left, they took with them not just power and protection, but the very scaffolding of society. Into that void stepped new peoples, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, tribes from across the North Sea, driven by ambition, pressure, and the lure of fertile lands. They arrived first as mercenaries, hired by desperate Romano-British warlords to defend against northern tribes. But soon they came as settlers, in greater numbers, with families, livestock, and gods of their own. As they moved inland, Roman towns crumbled, abandoned to weeds and wind. In their place rose timber halls and new village centers, crude but vibrant, pulsing with fresh purpose. With them came a new language, Old English, the root of what many would one day speak across the globe. The Latin tongue, once heard in courts and councils, began to fade, surviving only in the distant echo of church prayers. This era saw the birth of what historians call the heptarchy, 7 main kingdoms vying for dominance: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, and Wessex. These were not unified states, but shifting zones of influence, forged in blood, alliance, and ambition. Kings ruled from great halls of oak and feasted beneath banners, while warriors pledged loyalty in return for land and honor. Among these, Northumbria rose early, a beacon of power and learning. Its twin monasteries, Lindisfarne and Jarrow, became centers of art, culture, and Christianity. From here came the Lindisfarne Gospels, shimmering with color and devotion, and the Venerable Bede, monk and scholar, who would chronicle the early history of the English people in words that echo still. But power in this age was ever fleeting. As Northumbria waned, Mercia surged, a kingdom of river valleys and iron will, ruled by kings like Offa, who built a mighty dike along the Welsh border, a monument of defense and pride. Coins bearing his name traveled across Europe, testament to the growing stature of this warrior state. Religion, too, was in flux. The old gods of the Germanic tribes, Woden, Thuna, and Frigg, clashed and mingled with the teachings of Christ. Missionaries from Ireland and Rome carried crosses across wild terrain, converting kings with words, gold, and sometimes the sharp edge of consequence. Churches replaced temples, baptismal pools filled where once sacrificial fires burned. But conversion was rarely pure or swift. Pagan rituals survived in festivals and folklore, blending into a uniquely English Christianity, mystical, local, and earthy. Crosses were carved from stone, but shaped with the art of ancient knotwork, the sacred fused with the ancestral. Despite constant rivalry, these kingdoms were not always at war. Marriages stitched alliances, trade flourished, markets bustled with goods, salt, iron, cloth, and a new sense of cultural identity took root. Still, it was a hard life. Disease was common. Famine, a threat each winter. Raids from the north or the west could turn prosperity to ashes overnight. And no king, no matter how wise or strong, ruled in peace for long. Yet out of this fragmented, uncertain landscape, something remarkable began to emerge: the idea of England. Not yet a nation, not yet united, but a shared sense of land, law, and legacy. The roots of a people, Anglisk as they called themselves, were digging deep into the soil. By the 8th century, the balance of power was beginning to shift once again. To the south, in Wessex, new rulers were rising, shrewd, patient, and quietly ambitious. Their time would come. But for now, the map remained divided, the future unwritten. This was the Anglo-Saxon world, a mosaic of warlords and kings, monks and myth, chaos and creation. From its trials, the next chapter of England would be born: Viking invasions and the Danelaw, 8th to 10th centuries. The seas brought change. Cold and grey, they once protected the island, now they carried the longships of a new and fearsome force. In the late 8th century, the first Viking raiders landed on the shores of Northumbria. They came not as traders or settlers, but as warriors, lean, ruthless, and hungry for plunder. In 793, the monastery at Lindisfarne was sacked. Its monks slain or scattered, its treasures taken. It was a moment that would echo through history, the beginning of the Viking Age in England. A storm from the north had broken. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, fragmented and unprepared, could not resist the tide. Raids became invasions. Villages burned. Crops were taken. Churches looted. Yet the Vikings were not just destroyers. They were settlers too. With each passing year, more came, not just with swords, but with families, cattle, and ambitions for land. By the mid-9th century, the so-called Great Heathen Army arrived. Not a raiding band, but a vast force of conquest. It carved a path through the kingdoms, defeating kings and capturing towns. Northumbria fell, East Anglia fell. Mercia faltered. Only Wessex remained. And from Wessex rose a leader who would shape the course of England, Alfred. He was no ordinary king. A thinker, a reformer, and a warrior, Alfred rallied what was left of the Anglo-Saxon resistance. Through hardship and exile, he rebuilt, striking back with calculated force. The turning point came in 878 at the Battle of Edington, where Alfred defeated the Viking king Guthrum. In its wake came a fragile peace and a new map. The Danelaw was born, a vast swath of eastern and northern England under Viking control, ruled by Norse laws and customs, yet forever intertwined with Anglo-Saxon roots. In the Danelaw, old and new collided. Viking settlers built towns, farmed land, and traded across seas. They brought with them their gods, Odin, Thor, Freyja, but also absorbed local traditions. Intermarriage blurred lines. Languages mingled. Place names changed. From Anglo-Saxon to Norse, from Ton to Bai, from Ham to Thorpe. This era was not only one of war, but of cultural fusion. In towns like York or Jorvik, markets brimmed with goods from across the known world. Silver coins bore Norse names. Law codes, written in both traditions, reflected a shared rule born of necessity. Yet peace was always tentative. Alfred's descendants, most notably his grandson Æthelstan, pressed back. Slowly, deliberately, they reconquered the land, kingdom by kingdom. By the early 10th century, the dream of a unified England began to take form. But the Viking spirit never left. It reshaped England's bloodline, its language, and its identity. It challenged old powers and forced a fractured land to unify, not by accident, but by sheer survival. The Danelaw eventually faded into history. Yet the echoes of this age remain, in the names of towns, the rhythms of language, and the memory of a time when the sword and the sail ruled the fate of a people. The rise of Wessex and the unification of England, 10th century. In the wake of Viking conquest, Wessex stood alone, a kingdom bruised but unbroken. From this stronghold in the south, a new kind of leadership emerged. Alfred the Great had done more than survive. He had laid foundations. His reforms in law, education, and defense became the model his descendants would build upon. When he died in 899, he left a vision, not just of a fortified kingdom, but of a united land. His son, Edward the Elder, wasted no time. He pushed north and west, reclaiming lost territories with both force and diplomacy. Alongside his formidable sister, Æthelflæd, the Lady of the Mercians, he launched a campaign of reconquest. Town by town, fortress by fortress, they chipped away at the Danelaw. Their strategy was not just military. They built fortified burhs, early English towns, and established a network of defense that discouraged further raids and encouraged settlement. By the 920s, most of the Danelaw had been subdued. When Æthelflæd died, Edward seized control of Mercia, bringing it under Wessex's banner. But it would be his son, Alfred's grandson, who would complete the task and become the first true king of a unified England. Æthelstan, crowned in 924, was both warrior and statesman. he knew that unity was more than victory. It required legitimacy. He surrounded himself with scholars and churchmen, promoted law codes, and forged alliances with neighboring rulers. He saw himself not just as king of Wessex or Mercia, but as Rex Totius Britanniae, king of all Britain. In 927, Æthelstan conquered York, the Viking stronghold of Northumbria. With that, the old kingdoms were brought under one crown for the first time. He summoned rulers from Wales, Scotland, and even the Norse Gael kings of Ireland to acknowledge his overlordship. It was a symbolic act, yet it marked a turning point. The patchwork quilt of warring tribes and kingdoms was being stitched into something new, a nation. Under Æthelstan, England experienced a golden moment of consolidation. Trade flourished, law became more uniform, Latin and Old English documents circulated across the realm. His court became a center of culture, admired even on the continent. Silver coins bearing his name traveled far, spreading the idea of a single English kingdom. But unity brought its own challenges. In 937, Æthelstan faced a coalition of hostile forces at the Battle of Brunanburh, a great alliance of Scots, Norse, and Irish kings determined to break England apart. The battle was brutal and decisive. Æthelstan emerged victorious, and with that triumph, the idea of a united England took root not just in law or ambition, but in blood and memory. Though Æthelstan died childless in 939, his legacy endured. Successors struggled with fresh Viking incursions and internal dissent, but the framework he built held. England would bend, but it would not break. A line had been drawn between the chaos of the past and the possibilities of the future. In this age, England was not yet the realm it would one day become. It was fragile, young, and often at odds with itself. Yet something essential had changed. No longer a land of rival kings, it now had a single crown, and with it, a new sense of identity. The rise of Wessex had reshaped the island. From scattered resistance had come order. From the fires of invasion, a nation had begun to form. The road to conquest. England before 1066. When Æthelstan died in 939, the crown passed to his kin. But the unity he forged was tested almost immediately. England was still young, still fragile. The memory of Viking conquest lingered, and the Norse world had not forgotten this island. In 1013, a storm broke once again. Sweyn Forkbeard, King of Denmark, landed in England, not as a raider, but as a conqueror. The English crown buckled. King Ethelred, known to history as the Unready, fled to Normandy. The Danes had returned, but this time they came to rule. When Sweyn died, his son, Cnut the Great, claimed the throne. It was a strange moment. A Viking king now ruled all of England. But Cnut was no mere warlord. He married Ethelred's widow, united Saxon and Dane, and ruled with surprising wisdom. Under his reign, peace returned, trade expanded, law was enforced with a firm but steady hand. Cnut's England was part of a North Sea empire, a vast realm linking Denmark, Norway, and Britain. But empires built on conquest rarely last. When Cnut died in 1035, his sons fought over his legacy, and the English crown wobbled once more. In 1042, the Saxon line was restored. Edward, son of Ethelred and Emma of Normandy, was crowned king. Known to history as Edward the Confessor, he was pious, soft-spoken, and childless. Edward's reign brought both stability and uncertainty. He rebuilt Westminster Abbey, laying the spiritual foundations of monarchy. But behind its sacred stones, tension grew. At court, rival factions circled like wolves. The powerful Godwin family rose in prominence, led by Earl Godwin of Wessex and later his son Harold. Edward had spent much of his youth in Normandy, and his court bore French influence. Some say he promised the crown to his distant cousin, a duke across the sea named William. But in England, power often flowed not from promises, but from presents. When Edward died in January of 1066, the Witan, the Council of Nobles, crowned Harold Godwinson as king. It was a bold, urgent move. Harold was a warrior, tested and respected, and he had no time to waste, for England's enemies were already stirring. In the north, Harald Hardrada of Norway, the last great Viking king, was preparing an invasion. And in Normandy, Duke William was gathering ships, knights, and a holy banner from the Pope. The death of Edward had not closed an age. It had opened a contest. 3 men would now claim England, and only one would wear its crown. This was the twilight of Anglo-Saxon England. A land forged in war, faith, and resilience now stood at the edge of a new reckoning. The road to conquest had begun, and at its end, the fate of England would be decided, not by bloodline alone, but by blade and battle. Battle of Hastings and the Norman Conquest. 1066, a year that would echo for centuries. When King Edward the Confessor died without an heir, a crisis erupted. England's crown did not pass quietly. It became a prize. Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, was crowned by the Witan, the Council of Nobles, a seasoned warrior, respected and pragmatic. But his claim was contested, violently. To the north, Harald Hardrada of Norway, last of the great Viking kings, launched an invasion, joined by Harold's own traitorous brother, Tostig. Harold moved swiftly. He marched north, covering nearly 200 miles in days, and at Stamford Bridge he won a stunning victory. Hardrada was slain. The Viking threat was over. But no rest came. Even as blood dried on the northern fields, another army landed on the southern coast. William, Duke of Normandy, had arrived. William claimed Edward had promised him the throne. He had papal support, elite Norman knights, and a burning ambition to rule. Harold turned his army south once more, exhausted but resolute. On October 14th, 1066, the two forces met near Hastings. The English took the high ground, forming a shield wall, a human fortress of spears and resolve. William's forces attacked uphill, wave after wave. For hours the shield wall held, then the Normans feigned retreat. Part of Harold's force broke rank to pursue, and the wall fractured. The Normans seized their chance. Amid the chaos, legend holds that Harold was struck down, an arrow to the eye, and then cut down where he stood. The battle was lost. The king was dead. England's fate had turned. William did not march on London immediately. He moved cautiously, securing support, intimidating resistance. By Christmas, he was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, a Norman duke, now an English king. But conquest did not end at coronation. William transformed the kingdom, imposing Norman law, building castles as symbols of power, and distributing land to his Norman followers. The old Anglo-Saxon elite was swept aside. A new order took root. The Domesday Book, compiled 2 decades later, recorded it all, a ledger of a kingdom remade. The Norman Conquest was not just a change of rulers. It was a rupture of language, law, architecture, and identity. It marked the end of Anglo-Saxon England and the beginning of something altogether new. A kingdom under new kings, a people shaped by both sword and legacy. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through England's early history, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories from the past to life. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes as we explore the full story of England, from conquest to empire and beyond.